back to my channel. My name is Allie if you're new here, and if you missed part 1 of my Best of Horror 2024 GoodReads Choice Awards, I highly recommend going and checking out that video first and then coming back to this one. In this first video, I talk about 10 books from the 20 top best horror from the GoodReads Choice Awards. And in this video, I'm going to be talking about the next 10. But while I have you guys here, I wanted to talk about the top 10. I'm sure you're familiar with it if you're clicking on this video, but there's 20 nominees, and then after the first voting session, it goes down to 10, the top 10, until there's a winner. And our top 10 ended up being Stephen King, of course, We Used to Live Here, What Feast at Night, Murder Road, Bury Your Gaze, The Eyes Are the Best Part, Incidents Around the House, I Was a Teenage Slasher, Diavola, and Sleep Tight. Quite a few of those I read in the first part, and then the rest I will be reading in this part, or have read and I'll show you guys my reviews here. So there might be a little bit of deja vu for you guys, maybe a little bit of a broken record, because I will be throwing in clips from my videos throughout the year from when I read some of these books. But I'm so excited because there's still a few more here that I haven't read that I am really excited to get to and rank all 20 of them by my review of what I think of them and see what you guys think as well. If you've read all of these, please let me know, or which ones have you read, which ones are your favorite, maybe which one you voted for. Are we shocked by who won? We'll talk more about it, but first let's get into the first book. It is finally time. I'm so excited for this one, you guys. I have no idea. The first one is about 60 pages, but the second one is only 10 pages. So I think we're gonna have like a little, it's just gonna kind of depend on, I guess, story to story, how long they are. You know, I thought that there was a story in here called You Like It Darker, but I guess not. I thought usually he names them If It Bleeds. Is that what it's called? If It Bleeds? Yeah. And then there's like a story, If It Bleeds, in this actual short story collection, but I'm not seeing that. I have heard that if you've read some of his work in like other publications, his short stories, that there is some repeats in this. He's just like taken works from different things and put them together if they all meshed well to him, I guess, or if he liked the aesthetic of them all together, if that makes sense. But I do know that there is some new ones. I just don't know which off the top of my head without like researching it a little bit more, so I might do that this week for you guys as well. But I do know Rattlesnakes is new because it's the sequel to Cujo, and I just had Cujo on my summer TBR because I knew I would be getting to this. So I've just read Cujo. I'm ready for that one when it comes. But I only finished the first story, which was that much. It was called Two Talented Bastards. You guys will just see what I rate it on the screen whenever I'm editing. But I will say the story kind of like drones on for a while. You really have to learn about this. Not really this guy, although we have his point of view, but we're learning about his father. You know, those questions that everybody wants to know about where the talent comes from and the overall success, whether it's an author, an artist, or whatever. And he's very vague about his answers always, and even tells his son, like, that's not something he wants to talk about. And then, we just learn a lot about the dad's life and his success. But it then kind of turns into more of a horror, but not really. It's more sci-fi than horror. It wasn't bad. It was definitely a Stephen King. It's called The Fifth Step. I really liked it though. I feel like it was kind of like the first one, so I'm kind of seeing a little bit of a pattern. So short that I really don't want to say too much about it, but it is this guy who walks up to another guy sitting on a bench, complete strangers, and asks him, or tries to pay him and says, you know, can I just have a little bit of your time to talk to you? And the guy's like, no, I don't want your money. He ends up convincing him if he could sit and talk to him for a minute, and he talks about his sobriety up until the 5th, like each step 1, step 2, 3, and 4, and 5 of getting to that point and what has been helping him and stuff. And it's another one where you're just kind of there along for the ride. It's just a long conversation that ends with a bang, I guess. Willie the Weirdo sounds like fun. Let's see how long it is. Oh, it's just like a little over 10 pages as well. Danny Coughlin's Bad Dream is much longer. But I did finish Willie the Weirdo, and this is kind of about like a kid who has like the early signs of a serial killer, and he is like just into just like really weird stuff, and it's just icky. I don't think it was a terrible story. I think stories like that can be interesting. I like criminology, like getting in the minds of criminals and why they do the things that they do. So that's why I feel like I found it interesting enough. I'm kind of like, that's lacking a little bit for me. Danny Coughlin's Bad Dream, which is new. It is published first in this book. It was the longest one, from page 83 to 234. Honestly, it kind of felt like I just recently read the Richard Bachman books, and I say that because this story really reminded me of that writing style. It really just felt more of like a suspense fiction over horror or something weird and eerie by Stephen King. So he had this really vivid dream of him pulling up to like this gas station, and in the back of it seeing a dog messing with like something, like digging up something, and then when he walks up to it, he finds a body of this dead girl. And so it's kind of like one of those stories where like it's like a premonition thing where like he dreamed it, so then he's like, I can't rest until I figure out if it was real or not. It felt so vivid. And then he goes and he finds the body, and then the rest of the story is about two like detectives that are trying to pin the murder on him, because they're just like, this guy is so shady. He's saying he's seen this in a dream and whatever, he's cuckoo, whatever. So yeah, it's very suspense, like just trying, and kind of like crime fiction at the same time. I rather enjoyed it. I don't think it's a 5-star for me. But it was still interesting enough. I'm really hoping we get like full-on horror in this, and I'm starting to think we're not. I think it is going to be more so just very suspense, thriller type writing. I mean, as thriller and suspense as it gets with Stephen King. Finn is one that was published. I took screenshots because I Googled all of them so that I could know. I think all of these were published previously. So Finn was a short story that was first published on Scribd, which is cool because now it's Everend, in May 25th of 2022. This is like a psychological torture on this Finn guy. He kind of has just really bad luck his whole life, and then now that he's an adult, he is like taken hostage, and these guys think that he is somebody else, and they're going to psychologically torture him to get him to admit that he is somebody else. It is definitely a darker one with torture. Then there was On Slide End Road, which was about a mom and a dad, their 2 kids. It's kind of like the typical like mom, dad, daughter, son story. They're on a road trip with their grandpops, who are traveling to go see grandpops' sister, who is dying of cancer, and it's going to be their last time seeing her. But the journey there is wild because this grandpa, he is a veteran, and he is just rough around the edges, and he's not waiting for nobody. He's not dealing with anybody's bullshit. They're taking his car, even though it's slower, and it's going to be a long journey. And I have to say, I didn't really care for the slurs that were in this one, because I feel like it's just such a newer book that why are we still putting slurs in books? So that was a little disappointing, but I did like where it went. It ended up being a kind of like a carjacking type style story. And it was not an all-time favorite, but I didn't mind it. It originally published in 2020. around October, November, and it was for an issue of Esquire. And then the last one, just Red Screen, I freaking loved. Oh my gosh. I feel like if I'm gonna read these type of stories from Stephen King, I love when they are this style because it's very sci-fi. Think The Outsiders, or The Outsider. Think like Holly, that type of vibe, which you guys know if you've been on my channel. I freaking love Holly books so much. So I was super giddy as soon as the story started because I was like, oh my gosh. Pretty much it's about this detective who starts his morning, then he goes to work, and it's super short, so I'm not going to say too much, but he starts interrogating this guy who just murdered his wife. Like, the guy he's interrogating murdered his own wife, and so he's just interrogating him, and he's like, I mean, you confessed at the scene, blah, 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 and the guy is trying to explain to him that she is different, that she is no longer his wife, and it's been like that for a year, and he's telling him, like, the signs of how he was figuring it out, that she was somebody different, and so on and so forth. Definitely recommend that one. That one was really fun and really fast. Dive into the 3 stories I read. The first one was The Turbulence Expert, and this one wasn't super exciting for me. I think I mentioned how this was just about this guy who working for this company that has him just go on these flights, and it's about the whole fear, I feel like, of feeling a little claustrophobic and being in a plane and dealing with turbulence. And it's almost like he's trying to recruit a woman who is also on this plane so that he can retire, is what it seems. And it felt oddly placed in this book. I think it's the first one I can say about this whole anthology. But this one first was published in 2018 in a horror anthology already called Flight or Fright. And I feel like it would fit perfectly in that. It's an anthology all about flights and planes and stuff like that, and I feel like it just fits perfectly in that I didn't really need it, I guess, in this one. I landed at a 3 for this one. And then the next one was Lori, which I quite enjoyed. It wasn't a full 5-star for me. I landed at 4 stars with Lori, but this is about an older man who is now retired, living in Cayman Key, Florida. He has become very depressed and he's losing weight, and his sister is coming to take care of him since his wife has recently passed. His sister Beth is very concerned and worried for him, so she brings him, I had to look it up, it's a border collie muddy puppy, and she brings it to him because she's concerned about him and she wants him to be able to find something worth living for. It's kind of like those reels or TikToks you see where they're like, the dad who said he didn't want the dog, and then you see it like him like loving on it or taking care of it or like just doing something extravagant for this puppy, you know, that he didn't want. That's kind of this story. It's really heartfelt and really sweet, and this is actually the story where the cover, this like crocodile alligator situation, takes place. And I rather enjoyed this one. I thought it was really cute and, again, heartfelt. It's not really horror throughout, but definitely has a little speck of horror in the end with said thing. Side note, because this might be a little bit of a spoiler for you guys. So if you don't want to be spoiled, literally skip the next few seconds or minute, and I'm going to be jumping into my next story. I will say I gave Lori 4 stars, but yeah, just skip a couple of seconds if you don't want to be completely spoiled. It's not a huge spoiler, but something that I feel like if you're an animal lover, you might want to know. Or if you have a hard time reading about animal things and books, you might want to know. So not a huge spoiler, but I just wanted to confirm with you guys that Lori the dog, in fact, does not get eaten by the alligator or the crocodile. That does not happen. There's no like an animal suffering or dying or anything like that in this. I just want to make that clear because I feel like that's where your mind might automatically go to. Also, on my face right now, I am masking because, again, I thought I was done filming for the day, and so I just came home to do some skincare and chores, and I'm using the LYS Detox. This is their Think Deep Pure, can't even see this, Pure minimizing detox mask with pomegranate and charcoal. To the third and final story. Oh, wait. Lori. I forgot. Lori was a short story first published as a free download on his website in May 17th, 2018. So it's also not a new one. You may have already read this or heard of it. And then lastly, we have the sequel to Cujo, which is Rattlesnakes. And I was pleasantly surprised by this one. It was almost kind of like another novella in this, not really a short story. It was a little bit longer, although not as long as Danny Coughlin's Bad Dream, but it was still a rather long one. But this follows a man, Vic Trenton to be exact, who is the lead of Cujo. Not the lead, I guess, but like one of the main characters of Cujo. He is the father in Cujo. And it's about his life after the events that happened in Cujo and how him and his family were able to move on from everything that happened in that. It's a huge spoiler to Cujo. I highly recommend you going and reading Cujo first without me telling you those bits that could ruin the outcome of Cujo. But it is the aftermath of everything, but it's been several amounts of years. And he is staying out, I want to say this was Florida as well, but he's staying at another home because he's just been going through a lot in his life. He's elderly now and he's just trying to relax and retire with his life and just kind of try to find some peace. And while there, he finds out that his like next door neighbor that's staying next to him is an older lady as well, and they kind of start forming a little bond, but then he realizes that she is talking to invisible children. This lady prior had twins who were attacked by a rattlesnake and killed, but she talks to them as they are still there. They are still in the pram. She has clothes laid in the pram where the kids would be laying, and she talks to them and she acts like they are like interacting back with her. It becomes very haunting and very paranormal. 5 stars on Rattlesnakes. I really, really loved it. And yeah, that means I only have 2 more to go. So I just finished The Dreamers, and this is, or just was published for the first time in this collection. So it's another new one. And I liked it. I feel like there was parts of it that were a little slow for me. Sleep studies in general, I just feel like can be kind of like horrific to the point that I feel like they're really good elements for a horror story. Scientist is explaining to the subjects what's going to happen. They're gonna give them like, it's not really like a psychedelic, I don't know, like something that may help them like hallucinate. So I guess like a hallucinogenic or some type of like drug to help them maybe like have a better outcome of the experience. So they're told you're gonna go under on this drug or whatever, and we want you to dream about this red house with a green door, and it's like in the woods, and you're gonna go in and you're gonna pull up the floorboards and you're gonna tell us what you find. And the people experienced, or what he typed down that he experienced watching them, was eerie and creepy, but it wasn't bad. Guys, about the last story, it was called The Answer Man, I believe. It was also originally published for the first time in this collection as well, so it's brand new and one of the best in the book. It was so good. It is about this man who is kind of having a hard, I say man, but he's actually like a young man, like a, I would say like late teenager, and he is just beginning his adulthood, early adulthood, and he has this woman that he absolutely loves and adores, and he wants to marry her, and he's kind of been given a stern no from her father on asking for her hand, and he's trying to figure out what he's going to do with his life as far as work, and he wants to be a successful lawyer. And while driving one day, he sees this sign on the side of the road that says a certain amount, I think it's like $25 for any questions for like 3 minutes or something like that from the Answer Man. And curious, he gets out and goes up to him and asks him, and this guy is answering like all of his questions, and then the man tells him like, you know, you trust me, because if you didn't, I feel like you'd be asking me like what your mother's maiden name is, and you know, those type of like security, like password questions that not everybody is going to know. He's like, so that you can confirm that I'm telling you the truth. And then when he does ask those and the guy gets them all right, it's kind of like a, whoa, what is going on type of ordeal. It was actually so good. And when I first started it, I was just kind of like, I think I'm like that with a lot of these, because I this year have been in such a horror mood. I just want horror. I want back-to-back horror, that picking up anything else has been a little bit hard for me. And so I feel like that's kind of how I felt with this story, or with this whole collection, was because every time I would start one, I'm like, yeah, this just kind of feels like literary fiction, you know. I do feel like I resonated with his characters and liked his characters a lot more in these stories than I typically do in his horror books, so that was a plus. At least they were interesting characters that I vibed with, but I really wanted more horror from it, especially with the, you know, title, You Like It Darker. That I give this whole collection a 4-star, which is pretty high for me. I usually give out 3 stars with collections. Bury Your Gaze by Chuck Tingle. Horror movies within books, and that is what this is delivering. This is about a guy named Misha who is a writer. He writes horror stories that now as an adult he is able to sell to production companies, and that's kind of where the story starts us off, and he's being told by the creators that he has to kill off his 2 main characters who are in a relationship and are gay. And this is where the whole, as he quotes, gay tragedy comes in to horror movies, where the gay is always killed off early, or the gay in the end, it's kind of like a heroic thing that they do that involves them dying in the end, where they never get to be the main character, and they never get to be the final people of a, you know, the horror genre or horror movie. And it has been so interesting. I have been eating it up and absolutely loving it. I feel like he's done it again. Last year I read Camp Damascus, and it was the perfect summer horror read. I had such an amazing time with it. I feel like he does such a good job giving you the scares while also giving you this deep, meaningful book that really touches you, because this one, there's been times where like I've wanted to like tear up a little bit, but then there's times where I'm just like, oh my gosh, that's so gory and so good. Like the way he describes things are so detailed and just horrific, but in the best way possible. It's exactly what I want from a horror book, and he is just delivering it. I also bookmarked a part where the name was actually, or no, he brought up Camp Damascus, which I thought was really cool. I spot an ad for the latest gritty R-rated superhero epic, Heroes of Darkness, hanging in one office, and a poster for some awards bait docudrama about the tragic, mysterious events at Camp Damascus in another. I thought it was really cool, kind of getting a little bit of Camp Damascus mentioned in the book. I think he mentions it again, maybe a page or 2 later. I can't remember for sure, but I always love when authors do that. Yeah, the one about Camp Damascus. It was a small theater, but even in that tiny room, I could hear through the static. I got the message, heard him loud and clear, Robbie. That's why God led me here. I mean, you guys know I'm a huge Stephen King fan, and I love when he leaves those little Easter eggs and plops in his other story titles or characters from old books and stuff like that. So it was just really cool to see. I'm enjoying it so much. He's creating a show. It's so cool because we kind of have that aspect of his life. He also is going home to a school reunion where he's not accepted out of the closet. And so you get a little bit of that aspect of living in a hometown where you're not able to be yourself and freely be yourself without feeling the pressure or judgment. And he's also trying to navigate a relationship with that. Then he has his horror characters from his past stories literally stalking and haunting him. It's such a fun ride. I definitely, if you like horror movies and horror books that are very close to what it would be like watching a horror movie. I think you would absolutely love this. I thought I'd wrap up my thoughts on it. It did end up being a 5-star. I absolutely loved it. I feel like he really outdid himself with this one. I like this more than Camp Damascus. It was so good, and if anything, I'm just hoping that we continue to get horrors from Chuck Tingle throughout the years, even if it's one book a summer that is dedicated to the horror fans like myself. And then he can go back to his smut. But I need the one book a year. They have just been so amazing, and I feel like this is just such a good addition to the genre. And by saying that, I mean Chuck himself. Like, I feel like he's such a good addition to this genre. He does it so well, and it's so thought out and so detailed and horrifying. There was scenes where I was just like cringing up, like, oh my god, it's so gross. And it just, and again, the best ways. Like, he just does slasher and horror just so well. With that, I will say there's a lot of different ways that I feel like he could have wrapped this book up. I feel like he did kind of stick to it in a more meaningful way, which I didn't mind. It still is a 5-star for me, but I feel like he could have still went the other route of more gory. But I think in the heart of this book and what this is talking about, you kind of expect what is to come, but it is still such a beautiful wrap up, and he did not disappoint with the gory bits to get there. So at the end of my year, I finished the Angel of Indian Lake trilogy, and I'm not gonna lie, it has put me into a slump because it was so good. I feel like this is a really hard one for me to go about in this type of video because it is book 3 in a series, and while I feel like authors should be recognized for their work no matter if it's a series or a standalone, it is really hard when it's in this type of concept because you have to kind of tread lightly on spoilers from previous books in a series, but also on top of that, maybe it's just a me thing, but I do kind of feel like the series books are just kind of weird. I feel like in like the Choice Awards overall, looking at like the standalones, and then there just being like one book that is, I mean, I've seen some that it's like book 12 like in a series, and I'm like, whoa. I also kind of feel like it's hard to put in a type of category where you're voting, because it's really hard a lot of the time for like diehard fans to like, these standalones aren't better than this, because when you're thinking of this book, yes, you should be thinking of it as an individual book, but you're also thinking about that series that really like grasp your attention and that you've held on to for all of these, you know, years and has meant a lot to you. So it kind of makes it a lot harder for even myself to be able to say that this is worse than some of these like standalones or compare the two, because I'm just like, no, this isn't my favorite book in the trilogy, but like when I look at these books, I am kind of thinking of the series as a whole, so it kind of makes it hard for me to then be like, this standalone is better, or, you know, it's so hard. And then if there's a standalone that's really good, you're like, that one's so good, but like, this trilogy is so good, this series is so good. And this one felt so close to home with My Heart is a Chainsaw. Book 1 in this series, if you're not familiar, I absolutely love this series. We follow Jay Daniel, who is a horror, more so slasher fanatic. She knows all of the slashers. I had to wear my Friday the 13th shirt for this moment. But she is a fan of all of the slashers, and she knows all of the details, and she can reference them at, I mean, the drop of a hat. Like, she's very quick with it. She knows her horror genre, her slasher genre. With that being said, she has a lot of trauma. She's went through a lot in her life, and the thing that she's prayed for the most has always been for some type of insane massacre to happen at her small local town. And it just so happens to happen in this book, and we see her try to navigate it and use her horror knowledge to survive as long as she can, but to also kind of take us along with the story of what's going down and what to expect next, because that's what always happens in the horror film, you know? And it's just so fun. I feel like Stephen Graham Jones writes it in a way it's beautiful. It's just beautiful, spectacular writing. But like, you're really getting into Jade's head, and not everybody is a fan of Jade. I absolutely love Jade, but I know that she's not for everybody, so you're really in her head for a lot of this book and all of her ramblings and inner thoughts, but there is still a lot that goes down, and I just love how many horror franchises and movies that he references throughout this. It's insane. I think I made it like 6 chapters in and had already over 100 different movies referenced. Like, it was wild. Going into the second one, Don't Fear the Reaper was just as good. An incredible, I feel like we're a little bit not so isolated with Jade. It's a lot more story and plot driven, but what I love about this one and the continuation of this series and the finale of the series is we are kind of playing homage back to Jade and being more so in her head and following her story again, and everything comes to an end, everything wraps up, and I just love the way that he did it. I feel like he did a phenomenal job with this series as a whole, but I really think I mean, I just feel like there's not really any loose ends that I felt like I needed to have fixed. I obviously am gutted. I'm sad that this is over, and I would have loved to continue. But with that being said, I liked how it wrapped up. I felt like it was another really enjoyable read. They're very long, but so good. I feel like if you didn't like this one, you may still like the second one a lot, but this one I feel like is kind of an in-between of the second and the first one, writing style and viewpoints, but I do think we are more so kind of like back in Jade's head for most of it. It's just very action-packed at the same time that makes it really cool. The movie references are still there, and there's still a slasher vibe going on with this story. It's just a really fun ride with a lot of meaningful, like hard-hitting concepts and metaphors throughout, and I always cry by the end. And this is a series that I have given 5 stars to each of the books. It's a 5-star series for me. I absolutely love it. Again, I'm sad that it's over, and it did put me in a slump for my new year. I did not want to pick up anything else because I just kept thinking, like, this book won't be better. I have in fact finished We Used to Live Here. I'm gonna throw it up here because I had a friend who is super eager to jump into this book too, so she is currently borrowing it. But I did finish it, and you guys, I'm so excited to report that 5 stars. It is definitely one of my most anticipated because I feel like when this book came out earlier this year, before it did, I was already seeing people who were getting early copies and absolutely loving it. And then when it came out, it just blew up automatically. And I'm just always excited for haunted house stories regardless. This one, though, I feel like definitely has the same vibes of House of Leaves, which I'm still currently reading and need to get back into. I did feel the same feeling that I got with House of Leaves with this one whenever I was solving Morse code. The chapter then going to like a PDF file, those type of vibes I think was really cool. But I don't feel like it takes as much brain power as House of Leaves because it is just Morse code. That ends up being a sentence at the end when you put all of the words together, which is really cool. This is a type of story though that kind of just leaves things not really kind of hanging, kind of not. I don't know. It's just kind of a Just an up in the air type of story. Like, what do you think? I feel like that's the best way to describe it. So I feel like this is such a popular book right now and loved book just because I feel like everybody is going to take away from it what they want to take away from it. And that's really cool. It's a really cool concept. It's something unique and different that I have personally not seen in a long time. As far as, I've never read a book like this, but as far as the feeling while reading this book and then the feeling I got after reading it, I haven't felt that in years with books. And it just was so unique and so different. I feel like it's going to be really hard for this author to top his book with any future books because it was so good. But I also know I need to deep dive into Reddit now because apparently there's a bunch of Reddits about other Easter eggs that he left throughout the book that I personally didn't catch. Apparently there's like capital letters scattered throughout some pages. And sadly, since we were moving, I had to read this book with the audiobook for most of the chapters. And then I tried to pay attention with like the in-between chapters, kind of doing a little bit of a tandem read with them so that I could do like the Morse code and stuff. And then like the next chapter would start and I'd put my headphones back on and listen while I'm like cleaning or packing or doing whatever. So I think I need to sit down and do a reread fully physical with my eyeballs and like try to get every clue, hint that the book is giving me. But I definitely need to check out Reddit too and see what all everybody is saying because apparently there's so much to deep dive into over there that I just knew my brain's probably gonna explode and then I won't really know what type of review to give you guys. Besides just saying, I would just go into it knowing it is this eerie, spooky house vibe. This couple that's living in this house and this random family shows up and just asks if they can do a quick little tour because the dad used to live there. Honestly, going into it as blindly as possible, but also with the idea that this could turn into any type of story, I feel like is your best bet on it because it's just such a good time. I absolutely loved it and so glad I got to read it during spooky season. Guys, that I am getting back into House of Bone and Rain by Gabino Eglesias. I have never read anything from this author, and I'm not gonna lie, so far I wish I was enjoying it more. It's not reading so much as horror as it's reading kind of just like a sad like literary fiction, and I know that we're going to have some horror, but I feel like it's gonna be more so like this like realism horror type going on instead of like just full on typical horror, I guess. It has been said that it is Stand By Me with a haunted obsidian dark heart. A group of young men seek vengeance after one of their mothers is murdered in a Puerto Rican slum. So this does take place in Puerto Rico. We're following these like childhood friends. There's Gabe, Xavier, Tavo, Paul, Bimbo. I don't know how you say his name. I do have the audiobook for this, so I'm thinking about starting it just to see if it will help me like pick up the pace a little bit. I think I just need to get more into the story to be enjoying it a little bit more. Maybe it's just a slow start for me. But yes, what I've picked up so far is that a mother has been murdered from one of these boys, and they're kind of like making a pact together for this friend to get like revenge on the said people who have done this, and they're trying to figure out like who it is. And I just wish that there was a little bit more oomph to it, and like stuff's even happened and I'm still just kind of like, I don't know. I just don't know if this writing style is going to be for me or if this type of story is really going to be for me. I also think being in a reading slump and also like where my like headspace has been lately, I'm like, I don't know if a sad book is really doing it for me right now. I really feel for these boys and like what they're going through and everything that's going on, but I don't know. I just kind of wish that they maybe were a little bit more exciting than what they are. I think it's going to be a challenging read, but that's why I feel like I should probably try to tackle it the first day, if not the first and second day. But I will check back in when I've made some progress or have finished, let you guys know what I think. I am playing with my makeup today too, so don't mind me. But this book was, it's very complicated to talk about because I am one who is trying to branch out a lot more and be a lot more diverse with my reading, and reading from different authors with different backgrounds, and you know, those said books being about people with different backgrounds and just very diverse. And this one definitely checks those boxes for me. This follows, like I mentioned earlier, these boys who live in Puerto Rico, and one of their mothers is murdered, and this ends up being kind of like a king, I think the book called it like a kingpin or whatever, like it's giving like mob, and they're trying to get to like the bottom of it and figure out like who killed his mother, and kind of like get revenge on said person. And so it's very like revenge driven, which I like revenge stories. But this one, I mentioned that it was kind of like realism because it just feels so too real when it comes to like what's going on in their like little city or whatever. And knowing now after reading the author's like afterword too, or like acknowledgements, knowing how like close to home it was for him and how he wanted to tell the story of like how things had been and those things, that is what makes it feel a lot more real and a lot more intense, and not really like the horror I typically enjoy. Don't get me wrong, I sometimes am in the mood for that type of horror and wanting the real life aspect and how scary like real life can actually be, but I don't think I was in that headspace right now for that. And so I think that took me out of the story a lot because I just kept like, oh my god, like it's just very heavy, very grief centered, and I just feel like sometimes you have to be in the right headspace for that. With that being said, there is a lot of talk of like, I guess you could say Puerto Rican like folklore and like myths and legends and stuff about a hurricane, because in the midst of all of this happening with them seeking revenge, there is also a hurricane that's hitting. And the cool part about it, that I thought was a nice touch to the story, was the fact that the hurricane, you know how like they're named? The hurricane is named Maria, which is the name of said mother who was killed. So it's kind of like Maria's coming for them too. That was a nice like little spooky touch to it, with like then going into the real life horror of like natural disasters, and those obviously hit really close to home with how much I feel like the world faces each year with natural disasters, and everybody who is either dying or like losing everything because of these. But it also goes into play with some like folklore about how every time there is like a natural disaster, hurricane or whatever there, it's said that anybody who is pregnant and has like their little ones will like have like abnormalities and like be born with like really sharp teeth, or just so many different things. But it goes a lot darker than that, and those aspects of the story I ate up, because although it's dark and it's sad, I love like folklore and like legends and stuff like that so much, especially like in a book that I'm reading. But with that being said, I feel like there was just so much going on with this book. Like, we're following these people, but then we're jumping from Gabe's point of view of him and his friends and on this journey to find this person, while like brutally attacking people on that journey, to these women who are talking about like these urban myths and legends. And it just is kind of whiplash back and forth a lot, and trying to tie everything together, or does it tie together? I was really confused at times, and I feel like it made the overall story fall a little flat for me, just because I wanted more there. I felt like there was just so many parts of this that made it feel like I was reading several different books in one. And I love the fact that he really wanted to go in on, you know, his home at Puerto Rico and really talk about it and like real life horror that people face and tragedies, and then also wanting to play homage to like their, again, folklore and like natural disasters and so much, but I feel like there was a possibility of so many novels within this one. And I don't know if his other books, because I know there's another one, I think it's like The Devil Takes You Home or something like that from the same author, and I've had my eye on that book for a long time, but I'm like wondering how it's written, if it's kind of the same or not. But I just feel like I was left just very underwhelmed as a whole. I feel like there was moments that I absolutely loved, and I, you know, loved all the information I was getting, and I loved the tragic tale of these young men and like going through this and seeking revenge, although it was probably my least part or favorite part of the book, which is the majority of the book. So, but besides that, I liked hearing from the women's side. I loved the folklore. I loved the natural disaster talk and all of those horrors, if it's going to feel or going to be. Okay, so my battery died on me in mid-sentence and now I've lost my train of thought. But again, I like the aspects of this that took up the least amount of this book, than I guess the majority of it. But I think because of that and the aspects of just being so confused and just kind of whiplash back and forth, I also forgot that there's like talk about, there's like creature talk, and the overall way that the story went just really took me out. It just threw me through a loop because I was like, wait, what? This feels so like real life, and then we're going to now switch, and it just felt very abrupt and very weird. I hate that I didn't enjoy this more than what I did. I think because of the elements I did enjoy, I would give it a 3 because I did like those, but overall as a book, I didn't really care for this one. The eyes are the best part. This is by Monika Kim. I came across this book many months ago, and like many, was drawn to the cover because the eyeball, I knew I was going to be in for a gory time, and yes, I was. I loved it. It's gory, it's gruesome. Some of the ways she explained eating an eyeball made me cringe and like just feel so sick to my stomach and disgusted that I freaking loved it. If you don't know, this is about a girl who is living with her mom and her sister. Her name is Jaewon and her sister's name is Jaehyun, I believe. Really hoping I don't butcher their names because there is a part in this book where she talks about that. So leave it to me to ruin that. We follow Jaewon though, and her life, how hard she's trying to be successful, although she feels like she is failing in a lot of areas of her life, and it's really stressing her out. And it's kind of like seeing someone get to their breaking point throughout this book. We start off with recently her father has left the family, and the whole reason that they're in America and living in America was because of their father, and now he has left them. The mother is now raising the 2 girls and is struggling to make ends meet and works all the time and is very sad. And the mother is just very shocking, I feel like, for most of the book. Like the things that she will say or do are just like, what? But she is somebody that is trying to survive heartbreak. And that means Jaewon has to pick up a lot of the slack when it comes to, I feel like, raising her sister and being the confidant that her sister needs, where her mother isn't, I feel like, mentally there for it with her mental health, with dealing with heartbreak. And then their mom meets George, and he is this all-American white man who insults their culture and insults them with the comments he says about them, and yet their mother is falling madly in love with him. It's feminine rage, It's body horror. It's so many elements that I love, with just a super weird, creepy plot line all the way through to just a super twisted ending. And I absolutely loved it. I feel like it touches on so much of the culture and so much of the racism that is shown to their culture. And I loved every bit of this. It kind of took me back. It's jarring at times. It took me back to when I read, I can't even think of what it's called. I read it last year. Life Ceremony. I can never remember that name because it was by, is it Sayaka Urata. But it was a compiled short collection of stories, and one of them was Life Ceremony, but it was so body horror, jarring, and just so gross that I absolutely loved it. And at times, this reminded me of that because of the body horror in this and just how creepy the story is. Ultimately, this is a story about a woman who is obsessed with eating eyeballs. It's just, it's so good. You have to read it. If you love horror, if you love body horror and just gross things, you have to read this. It's so good. 5 stars. I did try sitting down and talking to James about what I was reading, and I'm telling him about like the racism aspect and like what some of these characters have said to these girls, and he's just like, oh my God, you know, and just like, it's almost like he's realizing why I'm liking it because of like the feminine rage, and I'm like, you know, there's gonna be a boiling point, and I was like, and I just know that something's gonna happen where they're gonna get like their revenge or something, and you know, because that's kind of like how the story builds up. That's not a spoiler because I do feel like to an extent it's expected, but also it just goes in so many different directions that I couldn't spoil it. Then I got to the eyeball part and he was just like, okay. He's like, I don't understand what you read. Been jumping into this and absolutely getting confused every single time. I did have to kind of stop the audiobook with this one or kind of do like a tandem because it can be rather confusing at times. I am somebody who adores Stephen Graham Jones, but I literally can tell you I had no idea what I was stumbling into with this one because it was not what I was expecting. This is very much literary horror, and it is, I feel like if you are a Stephen Graham Jones fan, you will absolutely love the writing on this. It's so good in a way of really describing his characters and doing almost this coming of age, but it's from the point of view of a teenage slasher, which, yes, he will remind you 50,000 times throughout this book that he is in fact a teenage slasher. It is rather repetitive. I think it's going to be super annoying for some people. I don't think that this is going to be everybody's cup of tea. And honestly, if somebody asked me which Stephen Graham Jones to read, I would say Mongrels or My Heart is a Chainsaw. Always My Heart is a Chainsaw. I love that so much. Over this one, because I feel like if this is your first Stephen Graham Jones, it might be a little off-putting for you to pick up his others because again, it's repetitive at times, it's rambly, but I feel like the way he writes always reminds me of Stephen King, which you guys know I absolutely love. And I think that's why I adore his work so much, is that similarity, the nostalgic feeling of picking up one of his new books and almost feeling like I'm reading a classic is just, it never gets old. I absolutely love that about it. And I adored this story when it comes down to the friendship and that bond that there is between these two characters. But I'm not gonna lie, there was rambly bits that I felt like I didn't need. There was parts of this character that I just hated. Obviously he's a slasher, but like, I felt like I wish that I got to a point to where I loved this character more than what I got to by the end of the book. I felt like I should have felt for this character a little bit more, where I ended up just being numb with it and just thinking whatever happens to him happens. I think that Stephen Graham Jones was really going for a side to really make the reader feel for this killer and, you know, kind of root for them in the end. But I just kind of felt like it fell flat for me just because it was really hard to get over the gruesome kills and then also have this like heartfelt, meaningful book about this kid. I don't know, it was a really hard one to like navigate and to balance, and I think it also took out a little bit of the fun of what a slasher is all about, which was really hard for me and is still kind of hard for me to like navigate around because I feel like it's hard to have a more of like a meaningful book whenever you are just kind of in it for the thrill of a slasher. But with that being said, I again loved the writing and the majority of this, and I think it was just another great one by him. It's not a 5-star for me though. I wish that it was, but I think I'm landing at a 4 with it. I just wish that there was more to this. I wish that maybe it was a little bit more lighthearted and just fun and just slasher vibes versus getting something that is more deep and meaningful. I would have liked something a little bit more lighthearted and fun and almost like just making the character more of an actual villain, I think would have just been such a good time. Instead of almost turning it into like a psychological thing that you're kind of like getting into his head, which I do find really cool. I liked the criminology side of it, of getting in the mind of the killer and this slasher and why he's doing the things that he's doing. But at the same time, I felt like those answers weren't ever like cut clear answers either, so it just kind of left you wanting more in that regard than kind of just had me wanting it to just be more of just a fun slasher at that point. I still think that we could have had that deep, meaningful moment with pulling everything together and what his mom had to deal with, what his best friend had to deal with him, and all of that. Like, I kind of wish that we had more of that moment, but I will say I feel like this book is a little bit more unique than anything I've ever read because it is really deep diving into the killer's point of view, not really sugarcoating it, making it out to be he is what he is, but at the same time, really trying to make you feel for that character and make it more deep and meaningful. So it is unique in a way. I think it's cool. There's a lot of concepts about it that I really do like. I just feel like it didn't cover everything that I wanted it to. It makes me wish that it was more of a fun slasher because I think I would have liked it more and rated it a 5. But I am landing at a 4-star with it. Those are my thoughts. Let me know if yours is different. I would love to know. Next up is A Sunny Place for Shady People. This is a story collection by Mariana Enriquez. She is the author of Our Share of Night, which I still have not got to, but it's been on my TBR for way too long. So I was really excited to get to one of her collections. This is also translated by Megan McDowell. And just like I did with You Like It Darker, I am going to do a quick run through of all of the stories, but I'm going to be super brief about them and the overall collection, so we're not here even longer. So the first story was My Sad Dead, and I gave this one 5 stars. This was about a woman living in a crumbling neighborhood, and I do have to mention, I don't know if it's the same for Our Share of Night, but this is a collection of short stories that are based like in Argentina. So it's having to do with a lot of tough subjects and devastating things that are going on there. And although there's some that aren't as relatable, there's also a lot that are super relatable that are going on, I feel like, around the world. For the most part, I love the fact of how she brought so many of these subjects into a story in a creative and sometimes very weird way, but I do have to say there was some flaws for me in certain areas with the way I feel like people were degraded or the way that she went about writing about certain things. I don't know. There was just some very icky moments for me that were very unfortunate because this was such a unique story collection. But like I mentioned, My Sad Dead was about a woman in a crumbling neighborhood in Argentina with constant deaths that kind of just churn into these like sad ghosts that she can see, and she has to like almost like console them to make them not like haunt as much. It was super interesting. The second one is the story that is named the same as the collection, A Sunny Place for Shady People. And I gave this one 3 stars. This one I felt like touched more close to home because the writer is visiting LA for a story on Elisa Lam. And it's close to home because I live in the United States. I don't live in LA, obviously, I'm far away. But like I have done research on the Elisa Lam story, and I know so much about the case that it was just like, it was really interesting and cool to read a story kind of based on it. It goes into detail about like rituals that are held at the Cecil Hotel up by the water tanks. If you don't know the story, this is not, I feel like, the time that I can really elaborate. The case is an actual like true crime case that happened. This girl was staying at the Cecil. There's a lot more details to it, but this girl was staying at the Cecil Hotel downtown LA by Skid Row, and she went missing. The last videos of her are being very distraught and confused, walking in and out of an elevator, and later her body was found in the water tank up at the top of the hotel. And it was like weeks and weeks later. So people had been showering with that water, drinking that water. And it's overall just super sad for her and her family, and never knowing what exactly happened. It was a really interesting take on it. I feel like it talked a lot about Skid Row and homelessness as well. Lost ones, as they were called, loneliness. It was a really heavy one. Third one was Face of Disgrace. I gave it 4 stars. This was about a girl whose face starts to disappear. It's told by her brother about the female curse in their family, and it's kind of like she's trying to figure out how it's linked, what this curse was, what happened to begin with it. There was a lot of really creepy moments with like whistling, and it was something. For me, what fell off from this being a 5-star was the questions I still had that just never got answered, and the super abrupt ending that just kind of left me a little unsatisfied with it. Next we have Julie, which I gave 2 stars. This is about a young, disturbed woman. I think it delves into the mental health side of things, but on top of that, she also has other deeper things going on that are just not as discussed as much as I feel like it should have been in a better light. It's kind of making her out to be, and I'm quoting this because I don't like to use this word as describing somebody, but as crazy or mentally unstable and that type of vibe, instead of like really delving into, I feel like, more so like what she is actually going through. Or at this point, it kind of seemed like she was just not really struggling as much as just living her life. But one of the things that she was obsessed with was the fact that she has sex with ghosts. And her parents are like trying to like medicate her. They think that she is just awful, and it's like she's tarnishing their name. They're wanting to drop her off with like her family in Argentina and then just leave her. And just the overall story of this I found interesting and weird, but at the same time I hated all of just the negativity and like the words that were like thrown in about her. And sometimes I came across it as even the cousin, who is kind of like the narrator of the story, I felt like even she like just would think like the most awful things about her in a way that just made the story not great for me. The amount of times the people in these stories called her fat ass was appalling. Next was Nightbirds, which I gave 3 stars. It was a very rambling yet entertaining story about 2 sisters. One is like quite literally like rotting, while the other one is kind of like an impulsive liar. And in this certain like folklore, I guess, like the women who are punished turn into birds. When a girl is murdered, the lying sister thinks she is a cat now. And it's kind of like, I don't know, it was just a rambling mess. I actually enjoyed it more than I thought I would while I was reading it, but it was like something would start happening and it was like about these two sisters and one of them is literally like rotting and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so interesting. But then it would be like, okay, now we're switching over to like this folklore about these women who turn into birds, and then it went back to the sisters and it's like the lying sister thinks like this cat is like this girl who is murdered and this girl was murdered, and it's like there was so many elements of the story going on that it was quite confusing and just again rambly, that in the end I was just like, what? Like what was all of this and how did this, like, I guess for me, all tie in together? It was just kind of all over the place. Next was Metamorphoses, which I gave 3 stars as well. It was kind of a take on perimenopause. This woman is really going through it and is having a hard time with like her doctors, and they ultimately decide that she needs to have a hysterectomy because she does have a tumor, like a benign tumor, and it ends up being this like huge tumor that was in her uterus that she now is kind of like obsessed with. She thinks it's beautiful, and yeah, it's kind of like an obsession with it that she has. It was really interesting, but I kind of had a hard time being in this woman's head. Next is Hyena Hymns, and I also gave this one a 3 stars. These two guys, they're a couple, they're visiting one of the parents. So it's kind of like a trip, you know, to like the in-laws for the one and then the parents for the other one. They go to an abandoned place while they're there. So it's kind of like the one guy is taking his, I can't remember if they're married, like boyfriend or husband or partner, to like some of the ruins of like his hometown or home place that he used to play when he was little, and he's telling him, kind of like spooking him on like the folklore of it, and it was like super unhinged. It's hard to talk lightly about these without like giving too much away, but it was just kind of a fever dream moment of like stepping into maybe like another realm, all being dark. Then we have different colors made of tears. Tears or tears, I feel like either one works for this one, which I gave 5 stars. This was probably, dare I say, my favorite out of the entire collection. This was about a woman who goes to this guy's house. It's a widow who is selling all of his ex or late wife's dresses, all of her elegant gowns and stuff. This girl works with her friend, or works for her friend's like antique store. So she gets all these dresses at like a really good price, a good discounted price, and she brings them back and they're all so giddy. She tells them like how this guy was kind of like weird, a little bit different, and they're just kind of like, you know, brushing it off or whatever. They're like, oh my gosh, let's try on the dresses. And then from there, it's so unhinged, it's so dark, but it's so unique. I've never read anything like it. And it's definitely the horror element that I loved from this book. The Suffering Woman, I gave 4 stars. This was about a woman being haunted by another woman who is dying. It's kind of like every day in her apartment, she can sense this like spiritual being who is not only like already like gone, like it's kind of like a ghost woman, but like she is suffering. And she's getting these weird texts from numbers that when she calls are out of service, and they're saying like, if you need help with anything, we can come help you. I know that you're going through like, you know, your chemotherapy and stuff. So if you need any help, and she's like, this isn't me. Like, who are they trying to contact? And it ultimately has her spiraling not only like about this woman, but about her own health. And she starts like almost becoming like a hypochondriac, thinking that there is something wrong with her nonstop. The Refrigerator Cemetery, I landed at 3 stars. This was about a woman who now later on in her life as a mother, she is feeling really guilty about what her and her childhood friend did when they were younger. Back in their home place, there was a nearby junkyard that was from a refrigerator factory where all the old models were placed out in just kind of like a landfill type situation. So it's a refrigerator cemetery. And as kids, they would go and play in them and have like all these kind of games and stuff. And this one just happens to be a who can hold their breath the longest, and side of it that just went horribly wrong. And now later in life, she's dealing with the guilt of it and wanting to go back to maybe change things or be at peace with it. A local artist, I gave 3 stars. This was just, I don't even know. I really enjoyed it. This was about a couple who were traveling to like this like what we would say like Airbnb, to this like little village type place that's been kind of ran down. Their train station has recently been like closed. So it's just kind of ruined their livelihood there because nobody wants to come there anymore. And they keep getting these really weird messages or things from the people that they're renting from, but also like the other people around keep talking about this local artist, and it ends up becoming almost like this cult-like story that was just super interesting, but there was elements of it that just kind of fell flat. I felt like it was way too long than it had to be too, but it was still, I feel like, an enjoyable one. And then the last one, Black Eyes, I gave 4 stars. This was about people who work for an organization that help homeless. They visit kind of like, I believe this one was also set in Argentina, but like they visit almost like a Skid Row, and the organization gives them all of this like what they're allowed to give out to the homeless. And they talk about like why we can't give out maybe like feminine products and stuff like this because it ends up, or cigarettes and, you know, other things like that, because it always ends up with people fighting over them and they get more deaths that way. They talk about how they are given a certain amount of meals every day that they can pass out. They really try to bond with these people. It was honestly a really great story until one day they're getting into their van to leave and these 2 boys come and knock and they're like, please let us in. And when the girl looks out, she notices that they're wearing like clothes from like the early 1900s, like they're like from a different time period. And she's like, she sees evil in their eyes, and it just like spirals from there. It was a pretty good time. Like I said, I landed at a 4. So I ended up with 1 2-star, 6 3 stars, 3 4 stars, and 2 5 stars, which if you guys know from my channel, that means with this collection, I am landing at a 3-star. I think what she was trying to accomplish with this was beautiful. I feel like there was so many like meaningful things that was addressed in this that I absolutely loved, especially when it comes to women and all of the like feminism stories. I ate up. I loved them. And I love that she kind of tried to bring a unique, weird twist, even horror, if you will. But ultimately, I think I would have liked a little bit more of the horror. And again, I could have just really done without the few stories where it was just nonstop insults to certain characters that just felt really uncomfy. I feel like if we're touching on stories like that and awful people who are going to say those things, I feel like it's one thing if it's like the bad person that we're not supposed to like. But when it's literally everybody in the story, it just really takes it out for me, because I just start to question like, is this what the author would have said about this woman? And not saying I do believe that, because I feel like she writes so many meaningful stories about women and what they are going through that it doesn't seem that way. But at the same time, it's super jarring, because when you're in the moment reading it, it feels that, if that makes any sense. Yeah, there was just a lot of elements that I could have really done without, but for what it was and how short it was, I did enjoy most of these. I have finished my next one, and I keep forgetting to update you guys. So my next one up was Murder Road by Simone St. James. And being somebody who enjoys Simone St. James, which I think I've only read 2, maybe it is just 1 I've read. I was thinking I've read at least 2. I feel like the vibe that I've picked up with her work, I've really enjoyed it. I know the one that I have read for sure was the Book of Cold Cases, and I really enjoyed that. I know it's not for everybody, but I felt like her style and her writing was so for me that I felt confident going into any more of her books. And this one just did not do it for me. So this is following a couple who are going to their honeymoon. So they are on the road going to like, I think this type of like resort or something that they're staying at. But mind you, they're driving, I can't even remember where this is like located. It's a small resort. It's also 1995. They're on their way to the small resort, and it's kind of like a road that's just like deserts everywhere. Again, I can't even remember. I couldn't tell you where this was at. Anyways, they get lost, so I kind of think there's a play there into the 90s because she does mention like getting out the map, and instead of having like a GPS or like, you know, your phone, just everybody having like a smartphone that they could just pull up your GPS. The couple is driving down this road out in the middle of nowhere. They're confused, they think that they're lost, and then they see this woman walking on the side of the road. And I feel like this kind of could play into the 90s too, because people were a lot more willing back then to stop for strangers, and they ultimately do and let this girl into their vehicle and soon find out that she's bleeding very heavily and has been wounded. And this girl starts to tell them like, I'm so sorry, like he's coming for you now. And then like this truck is like barreling after them. And I keep checking the synopsis because I'm like, I don't want to say too much, but in the synopsis it does say this quote unquote hitchhiker does die at the hospital. And so this makes the police of this like small town that they took her to, what was the name? Cold Lake Falls, very like eerie and like questioning them. And they're like, you got to stay in town now. Like you brought this girl here and she dies, and you have no like credentials showing your story adds up or like, you know, what happened. And not just that, but like we're starting to see this type of plot holes in their relationship. Not so much talking about like the book, but the fact that like maybe these two people who just got married didn't take the time to get to know each other as far as they probably should have, or as deep enough as they should have. They both have been keeping secrets from each other, and for whatever reason, the guy is kind of like, don't tell them a truck was following us, and like just stuff like that. And it's just, stuff's not adding up. And the whole premise of it, I think, was really good. I was excited for it. I was like, oh, this is going to be a really cool thriller moment. And again, the writing I think is fun. It's fast paced. But I ultimately, and I think that this is going to come down to a personal preference, I ultimately did not like where the story went. I don't think it has to go in this particular direction. I feel like with books, and maybe she's just kind of known for this because it kind of feels like the last one I read to an extent of like kind of shifting gears. But for me, I feel like this one had the potential of just being a somewhat realistic thriller. And I know I've been called out recently because I think somebody was saying like, you can't take thrillers like that seriously, or you have to be able to let thrillers be a little bit more not realistic and question, you know, motives, and like question like things that happen and blah, 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 blah. Like you shouldn't take it too seriously. You're supposed to let thrillers have that moment to do whatever they want with it. I agree, but I feel like with this one, I would have enjoyed it so much more if it wasn't this case. I just really wished it was a little bit more like real life horror than what it leaned into. And also the reveals within these characters' secrets and all of that were just so underwhelming for me. And then how it just all wrapped up in the end was just like, okay. Like it just kind of felt like a disappointing read, unfortunately. I am landing at a 3-star. I still love Simone St. James' writing. And I overall enjoyed the first like half of this book. Yeah, I'm just really disappointed with where it went after that. Let me know what your favorite Simone St. James is. I want to get to some more. I actually own a few of hers, so I am going to be reading some more of them. But yeah, 3 with this one. I will be back soon to get to the next. Guys, I have done it. I have completed the Bog Wife, which means this is my last book for the Best of Horror 2024 from GoodReads Choice Awards. And this one, The Bog Wife, is by Kay Chronister, or Chronister? I'm not sure. This is very much fantasy horror. Think almost like What Feast at Night, that type of like fungi horror, but make it bog. You know, I really wanted to love this. Even on the cover it says, a haunting, brilliant novel from Paul Tremblay. So I was like, oh, I'm in for a good time. And don't get me wrong, there was some really haunted parts that I was just like, what? But overall, it left me unsatisfied with where it ended. And I really think it was the buildup of it. I did not like the pacing of this. I felt like it was so slow getting to know all these characters. We are following quite a few brothers and sisters. I can't remember how many there were. Each chapter, there's not really chapters, but like each kind of section, we're going through the different seasons, and then with the seasons we have the different characters. So we have Nora, who's a sister, Winna is a sister, Ida is a sister, and then we have like Percy, who's a brother, Charlie's another brother, and pretty much this father is dying, and the next to take over is going to be his oldest son, Charlie, and he's like, he's a disappointment. I don't want him to take over and be the next one to get a Bog Wife. And then he even like asked Percy to kill his own firstborn son, Charlie, his brother. So this family has tended this cranberry bog. In exchange, the bog sustains them. The staunch seasons of their lives are governed by a strict convent that is renewed each generation with the ritual sacrifice of their patriarch. And in return, the bog produces a bog wife. Brought to life from vegetation, this woman is meant to carry on the family line. But when the bog fails or refuses to honor the bargain, the Hadstleys, a group of discordant siblings still grieving the mother who mysteriously disappeared years earlier, face an unknown future. Middle child Winna is summoned back because she is the one sibling who has been able to escape from this cult-like raising and build a life of her own, and the others start slowly realizing what type of life she has developed outside. And all the while they're freaking out, trying to figure out how they can keep this bog sustainable to sustain them and to get Charlie a bog wife. And there is definitely, again, haunting moments, unhinged moments, horror moments. I feel like the concept is very horror driven, although this book is so slow pacing and so character driven that you're really just learning about the characters with like a little talk about like, I don't know, it's like, yeah, let's throw in like this whole like sacrifice thing, but I feel like it was like brushed under the rug. Like it was just very swift with it. And then it's like, we move past that really fast and just into these people's lives that were just not that interesting to me. And then moving forward, I was just like not really caring what direction it was going to go in. And then it took a turn of events and I was like, oh my gosh, I really like where it's going now. I really like this. So it was just one of those bittersweet moments of landing at another 3 because there was elements I liked of this, and I think that this could have been a higher rated book for me if it wasn't for that slow pacing with just these characters that like I just didn't really care about or needed more oomph, I guess, to the story to keep me entertained throughout. I feel like it could have been cut short even. Maybe a novella I think would have been a lot better for this one, if I'm being honest. And with that being said, you guys, we have made it to the very end of the video. I am super stoked that this journey is completed. I feel so accomplished. yet so tired and ready for it to be done. So thank you so much for watching, and if you would like to see my stats on my ratings and how I would rate them compared to Goodreads, keep on watching. So first of all, let's get into my ratings, because this journey has definitely showed me which horrors I really enjoyed this past year that came out this past year, but also the ones that I didn't really care for that much. Since we're going to jump into my ranking next, and we're gonna start with the lowest one, I thought for now we could start with the highest point, which is my 5 stars. Because during this experiment, I discovered that I have 5 5-star horror books from 2024. I love all of these so much. The ones I don't own, I'm going to own very soon. I just enjoyed them so much. I mean, you guys have seen my reaction with each book as we've went. But with that being said, next up we have my 4 stars, which I still really enjoyed, really liked, but they just weren't the perfect 5-star for me for whatever reason. And I did end up with 7 of them. And while I had no 2 stars, although a couple of these just about fell under a 3-star, I did land at 8 3 stars, which isn't amazing when it comes to down to the fact that these are like supposed to be the best horror books of the year. Everybody's taste is different. Some of these books probably worked for you a lot better than they did for me, and some of my favorites may have not worked for you. I do really hope that I was able to navigate my reviews well enough for you to understand why a book maybe fell short for me versus other ones, or why I liked other ones, whether it was just a personal preference or maybe a favorite subgenre, or like a favorite plot point, plot twist, something within the book, or even just the writing if it was a top author for me. And with that being said, I'm going to throw up Goodreads top 20 to 10 books of the year. So these are picked by you, the readers, who voted on your top horror book of 2024. And these are the ones that didn't make the top 10, but they all still had a rather decent amount of votes, enough people really loving these books. And although it looks slightly different for me, I did end up having 7 in common in this bracket. And I'm going to be rather fast about this because you guys have seen my reaction in part 1, and you guys have seen my reaction in this video to each of these books, and I don't think it's gonna be any surprise of how these all landed. So yeah, I'm gonna be quick about it. So in last place and 20th, I do have House of Bone and Rain by Gabino Eglesias. I feel like that's probably not a surprise for you. It's probably not a surprise that number 19 is Indian Burial Ground by Nick Medina. These two just really fell short for me when it came to the overall story and where it went, and making me feel entertained and not let down. And I could say the same for number 18, which is This Cursed House by Del Sandine. This is a debut, and I hate that it's so low on my list, but I just wanted more with this one, or maybe a shorter book in general. I felt like this one had so much potential, and it just fell off for me. For 17 is Murder Road. Same exact thing as This Cursed House. This one just had so much potential with the buildup and then fell off. But I do love a good Simone St. James. 16, I am giving to The Bog Wife by Kay Chronister. And while I didn't mind the fantasy horror, bog horror here, I wanted more of that. Number 15, I'm giving to the short story collection, Sunny Place for Shady People. I loved so many of these, but so many of them were also very problematic and unsettling, and not a good type of unsettling way. 14, I'm giving to the beautiful gothic My Darling Dreadful Thing that I wish like crazy I loved more than what I did. I definitely will be checking out this author's future work, but this one didn't do it fully for me. Kind of seeing a pattern here because I could literally just say ditto to the last one once again with Diavola. It was by Jennifer Thorne, and once again, I liked so many aspects of this story, where it went, but there was just this in-between part that just kind of felt like your typical thriller, which doesn't always land high for me. Next up, I have Sleep Tight by J.H. Markert, and I feel like we're kind of reaching that middle ground where I really enjoyed it, gave it a 4-star, but it still had its flaws and moments that I could have done without, or areas that I was like, that could be better. And number 11, we have So Thirsty by Rachel Harrison. You guys, I love Rachel Harrison, so don't come for me. I know this is not a strong one for her. I agree, I see you, but I love my vampire books and I love Rachel Harrison, so that's why it's so high up for me. I know that's not gonna be for everybody, but it is for me. These are my top 20 from 20 to 11 that are my picks versus GoodReads and how they were ranked. I, again, had 7 in common, at least like on the same lower ranking, although I believe So Thirsty actually came in the same spot. So maybe he won't come for me. Maybe that is just like the average rating for So Thirsty. But moving on up to the top 10, these were the ones picked from GoodReads. The top 10, you're gonna see some that were mentioned in my lower rankings. But I do feel like I have a lot in common with this top ranking. Once again, actually just 7 in common with the same like ranking, and I don't think any of mine actually matched up as far as placement. In 10th place, I have What Feast at Night. I think this was a very strong sequel to this series, but I feel like with it being a series, it's hard for me to base this book in a ranking style with other standalones. Plus, on top of that, this one was not as good as the first for me. Next up at number 9, I was pleasantly surprised by Blood Like Mine from Stuart Neville. I've actually been seeing a lot of people read this recently and be very surprised with how low this one was ranked and how many people have actually picked this one up. I feel like it's just kind of one of those gems that made the list and more people are reading because of it and really enjoying this one. Number 8 is the story collection You Like It Darker. This one's so much lower for me because, for one, it's a story collection, which doesn't really make it lower than first place. I know that this is the one that won. I do think it is because of the name Stephen King, but with that being said, there was so many good short stories in this collection that I absolutely loved and gave 5 stars to. But there was also ones that just really didn't do it for me or that I felt was really out of place in this collection. So this is not my top one, but rather in number 8. Next up, I actually have The Book of Witching by C.J. Cook because I absolutely fell in love with half of the story. Half of the story takes us back in time to the witch trials where we're following this woman and her heart-wrenching story about her being sought out and made to feel like absolutely nothing and be called a witch and be imprisoned because of that. And her story I absolutely loved. It's a little lower on my list just because I really fell out with the pop culture other half of this that came with the more current story. And I just kind of wish it was just a story about this past woman. I didn't need the intertwined moment going on. Then I have I Was a Teenage Slasher by Stephen Graham Jones. This one did rank lower than the 3rd book in his Indian Lake trilogy, only because of my thought process with it. I felt like it was all over the place in that clip, but I was just really confused on where I stood with this book. Since then, it is a book I continue to think about. I do think upon reread, it could possibly be a very strong 4, maybe even 5, so I probably would end up bumping it in the long run. But as of now and where I stand, it is here. At number 5, I have Incidents Around the House by Josh Malerman. Unlike some people, I really enjoyed the haunted little girl aspect of this. I liked the unreliable narrator of being in the mind of this little girl who is potentially being haunted and possessed by other mommy. I had a great time with this one. Number 4, although it is the 3rd in a trilogy, I am giving it to The Angel of Indian Lake by Stephen Graham Jones. I cried once again on my journey with J. Daniels, and I just absolutely love this series. I think that this placement is definitely a personal opinion, personal preference, just because I enjoy the series so much, and I know it's not for everybody, but his writing is incredible to me, and I knew that one of his was going to make my top 5. And number 3, I have Bury Your Gaze by Chuck Tingle. He's once again amazed me with his horror writing. I cannot wait for his next one. And number 2, we have We Used to Live Here by Marcus Kliewer. I'm also down for a reread on this one because I just want to invest more time into it and the research and all the clues that I think I missed the first time around, which will probably make me like it even more. Which lastly leaves me with my top favorite horror book that was released in 2024, and that was The Eyes Are the Best Part by Monika Kim. I'm obsessed with this. I love a good female rage and just unhinged moment, and this book delivers with that. But I'm not gonna lie, I was very shocked that this ended up being my top book for this video. And so this is my top 10 favorite books in the horror genre that were also GoodReads Choice Award nominees for 2024. With that being said, I'm going to wrap this up. Thank you so much for watching this 2-part video. I know this one was super, super long, but I appreciate you. Let me know what all books you read from last year in this horror genre, and which one was your favorite, or how you would rank the ones that you read. Yeah, thank you so much for hanging out with me, and I will see you in my next video.